Hey listeners, thanks for dropping in. I'm Christy.
And I'm Melissa. And this is Buried Motives, where we dig deep into the details of some of the most gruesome
dirtbag murderers. Hey listeners.
Welcome back to Buried Motives.
We are so happy that you're choosing to spend a little bit of time with us today. And I'm happy too, because I'm excited to hear what kind of case Melissa's going to tell us today.
I'm excited actually to tell you this one, Christy. I think it'll get you riled.
Oh no.
I actually have fun picking cases that I'm like, oh, and this will tick her off, and this will tick her off.
You do?
I do.
Melissa.
Doesn't even have her throat punch shirt on today.
I don't.
There are a whole bunch of different ways that we choose cases, right?
Definitely. But I don't usually choose one just to rile up my co-host. All right. So how did you choose today's case then? Was it just to rile me?
No, actually, it wasn't just to rile you.
Okay.
But I did choose this one for a very unique reason.
Oh.
I came across this case while I was on a true crime forum. And people were discussing their most watched interrogation videos. And this one was mentioned again and again.
Really?
So you might be familiar with this case. People actually said that they watched it over and over again, year after year.
What?
Yes. While some marveled at the smoothness of the entrapment laid out by the interrogators, others couldn't get over the reactions the dirtbag gave while pretending to know nothing about the situation in question. More than one person said they used the video to fall asleep to.
You're kidding.
No. The comments about the interrogation were just so fascinating that I had to figure out what this case was all about.
Oh yeah, the curiosity would have gotten to me too.
Yeah. So it might be one that you guys are familiar with, but I actually hadn't heard it before. Just like the interrogation video, this case was captivating for me, just like the victim had been in her short life.
Aw.
Sherri Ray was born February 7th, 1957 in Walla Walla, Washington.
Walla Walla?
Yes. Isn't that awesome?
Yes, I want to say I'm from Walla Walla.
Well, she actually was. Her parents, Nels and Loretta Rasmussen, had 3 daughters, and she was the middle of the 3. With her sisters, Connie and Teresa, she was lovingly raised. Her dad was a dentist, and her mom worked as his office manager. Together, they provided for the family very well. It didn't sound like the girls wanted for anything in life. After completing high school early, Sherri entered Loma Linda University in California at the age of 16.
16?
Yeah, she had actually skipped 2 grades.
Wow.
Mm-hmm. She was incredibly smart.
That is smart.
Mm-hmm. At university, she studied to become a nurse, aspiring to the field of critical care. She was extremely intelligent. By the age of 23, she had actually earned her master's degree in nursing.
Holy.
Yeah. When she entered the workforce, Sherri's kind and compassionate nature, coupled with her dedication and work ethic, allowed her to rise very quickly to the director position at Glendale Adventist Medical Center.
Wow. And like under 30.
Yeah, she was 27.
Holy cow.
It is incredible. She was a really gifted teacher and a wonderful public speaker, inspiring others to become more. By the age of 27, she was a sought-after international speaker addressing cutting-edge critical care nursing developments.
Wow.
Yeah.
She's amazing.
There were comments made about when she was a child about how she wanted to just change the world, and she was on a path to do that.
Sounds like it.
Mm-hmm. With everything in life going her way, in the summer of 1984, while attending a party, she met a tall, dark, and handsome John Rutten, and a fairy tale romance began.
Is he going to be trouble?
Well, I'll let you decide.
That means he is.
I have my personal feelings on John. I'll let you decide for yourself whether
Okay.
he's a good guy or a bad guy.
Okay, I'm going to stay open, but I just know we're talking about true crime, so I'm suspicious.
John, at 25, was a recent graduate from UCLA and worked as an engineer. And with Sherri, the tall Scandinavian beauty on his arm, they were the perfect couple. Sherri was actually 6 feet. She was really tall and gorgeous. John would tell friends that Sherri was the kind of person he wanted to be. She made him want to be a better person. And it sounded like she was just that incredibly motivating person that made everybody want to be a better person.
Yeah, I'm sure her energy would be contagious.
Yeah, it sounded like it was. The couple bonded over their athleticism. They were both runners and they loved their careers. It didn't take long before the two were inseparable, and an engagement followed in May of 1985. John gave his fiancée a shiny new gray BMW as an engagement present.
Not too shabby.
No, I was thinking car or ring. What would have been your preference?
Well, I'm sure she got both. It's always both.
Yes, right? I don't know if she actually got a ring. I couldn't reach
sure
his
she got a ring.
Yeah.
I'm sure she got a ring.
On her finger, there wasn't a ring. It was only a wedding band.
Oh, then I don't like that she only got a car.
Well, I'm not sure if it was both or if she got the car over the ring.
Okay, but she's a nurse, so maybe she can't wear her ring sometimes?
That's true.
Yeah.
She did have a very plain wedding ring. It was just the golden band.
Okay.
Either way, the couple did marry on November 23rd, 1985. So it was a quick engagement too. The newlyweds spent the holidays with their families. The young couple met their new niece and learned that another niece or nephew would soon be on the way. They exchanged presents with extended family and basked in new marital bliss. At least that's what the image that was being presented was. As everyone knows, fairy tale romances very rarely actually exist.
And sometimes they're horror movies on the inside.
That's right. This one did seem like it was pretty fairy tale-ish. But in hindsight, there was some speculation that John wasn't feeling like he was fitting in with Sherri's family. That he might be feeling a little bit intimidated. There were some videos taken during this family Christmas gatherings that showed John talking to their infant niece loud enough to be overheard by others. And he's talking to this 4-month-old about his kind of place in the family.
Oh.
It was a little odd, but very kind of passive-aggressive at the same time.
Absolutely.
Yeah. It did sound like Sherri's dad, Nels, could be an intimidating guy. He was a very successful, confident dentist, and he had the air that his daughters deserved the best of everything.
Right, because he's always given it to them.
Right. And I doubt that any man would have actually been considered good enough for Sherri. She was a rock star, in her father's opinion.
Well, it sounds like she was a rock star.
She absolutely was. Despite John's insecurities about fitting in with the family, the couple carved out their niche in the world, living at Sherri's Van Nuys condo that her parents had gifted her in the 7100 block in Balboa Boulevard. They had previously purchased it for Sherri so that she would be safe in the big city. So they weren't overly thrilled that she had moved to LA, and this was her father's way of kind of keeping her safe, is that he purchased her house in a gated community.
Nice.
Yeah. The community was surrounded by a 6-foot fence wall all the way around, and it required keys to get into the complex.
Okay.
The house that was bought for them was a 3-story mock Tudor style home. And I have to explain the layout. It was tall and narrow, with the garage located under the 2 upper floors.
Oh, yeah, because a lot of LA homes don't have basements, right?
That's right.
Okay.
It was tall and narrow, with the garage located under the 2 upper floors where the kitchen, dinette, and bedrooms were located. There was a sunken living room on the main floor. That's where the front door was. And there were patio doors off the upper kitchen nook that led out onto a balcony to the rear of the house where the opening to the garage was.
So was it just like the sunken living room when you first walked in?
Yes. So when you walked in the front door, it was just a sunken living room. There was a walkway along the right side of the wall that attached to the garage.
Okay.
And then you went up a few stairs and that went to the second level. That was the kitchen, the dining room. And then there was a door off of that led up to stairs that went up to the upper floor, which was the bedroom.
Okay.
So to get to the kitchen and the dining room from the living room, you had to go up a few stairs, but not a full flight of stairs. There was a railing at the top of the living room that was kind of like a half wall on the other side of the dining room. And through that railing, you could kind of see through to the sliding doors that were off of the breakfast nook that led out onto a balcony.
Okay.
That balcony was over top of the garage entrance at the back of the house. Okay.
I've got it pictured.
Perfect. There was another door off the living room on the right-hand side of the front entrance that opened into another stairwell that went down into the garage.
Okay.
So that's the layout of their house. It actually becomes very important. On the morning of Monday, February 24th, 1986, the newlyweds were lounging in bed, contemplating the day and the week that lay ahead of them. That morning, John was getting ready for work, but Sherri was still in bed. This was not the norm. Usually she was the first one up, but this morning she was debating calling in sick. She had injured her back the day before while working out, and she was going to use it as an excuse to get out of teaching a human resource class that she didn't really want to teach.
Can you blame her?
No. So she wasn't actually sick, but she did have kind of an excuse of why she could miss work, and she was going to use it.
Yeah. And it sounds like she probably didn't do that very often.
No. It sounded like she just really couldn't get behind this human resource class that they wanted her to teach. She didn't really see the value in it.
Right.
And so she was dragging her feet on it. So when John left for his engineering job at Micropolis that morning at 7:20, Sherri still hadn't made up her mind about whether she was going to go in or whether she was going to stay home. John went through his usual morning routine with the addition of dropping off some dry cleaning on the way to work. So he arrived shortly before 8. Then, mid-morning rolled around, he called home to check in with Sherri, but no one answered. And the machine didn't come on. It was a bit unusual because they usually turned the answering machine on when they left the house, but he figured that Sherri might have just forgotten about it. So he tried her work office, but the secretary said she hadn't come in that morning. Again, this wasn't really an unusual thing because often when she had an early morning class, she didn't come to the office first, she just went straight to the class. So John tried 3 or 4 times throughout the day, but he still couldn't get a hold of Sherri. But he wasn't overly worried. He carried on with his day just like normal. On the way home from work, he picked up his dry cleaning that he had dropped off that morning. He also made a stop at UPS, and then he headed home. So this all tells me that he wasn't overly anxious about getting home. He wasn't worried.
Right.
When he arrived home, the garage door was open and Sherri's BMW was gone. He also noticed that there was some broken glass on the pavement by the garage entrance. He later says that he assumed that this glass had been from a broken window or something that Sherri had hit while she pulled the car out of the garage. Again, he's not feeling overly anxious about this. He said that she had done something similar a few weeks before and had broken the aerial off of her car. It sounded like the garage was a really tight fit for both of the couple's cars, and going in and out was a little bit tricky. And despite Sherri's other perfections, she didn't have a knack for parking the garage.
I would hate that. I'd be like, no, I'm not going to park in the garage. It's okay.
I'll just park out here, thanks.
Yes.
But it sounded like it was a little tricky. And so when he saw the glass, he's like, oh, I wonder what she's broken now, or I wonder what she's hit now.
Okay.
So no alarm bells are ringing for him. It wasn't until John saw the door from the garage into the living room was slightly ajar that he began to think something is not right. That's when he saw his wife of 3 months on the living room floor.
Oh, no.
Yes. Sherri was on her back, beaten and bloody, still in her camisole and bathrobe from that morning. Her body was cold, stiffened in a grotesque pose, arms in the air, hands frozen in claw-like fashion, like she was still fighting something off. One knee was slightly bent upwards, one eye open, the other blue and swollen shut.
No way.
Yeah. John immediately called 911 at 5:59. When police arrived just 9 minutes later, they found Sherri just as John had found her. So he hadn't touched anything. There were 3 obvious bullet holes in her chest aimed right at her heart. At least one of them had been a direct contact wound. The bullets would later be identified as .38 caliber slugs. During the autopsy, the coroner stated that there was another bullet type wound around her right eye, but it sounded like that one was just a hole from another impact wound. It wasn't actually a bullet wound, but that's how the coroner had described it in his initial report.
This sounds like a crime of passion. Someone was angry.
You're on the right track, Christy, because Sherri's left inner forearm had a vicious bite mark on it that had to have happened very close to the time of death because there were no signs of inflammation around it.
Oh, so definitely during the attack.
Mm-hmm. The left side of her throat and her left eye had abrasions, and her right eye, on closer inspection, bore the marks of being pistol whipped at least once or twice. In addition, there were other unexplained head trauma with circular patterning. Her upper lip had been busted open, and her hands showed defensive wounds. 2 of her fingernails had been broken off, and they were found by the front door. Her eyes showed signs of petechial hemorrhage, indicating that she had been strangled at one point. Some future reports mentioned ligature marks around her wrist. I didn't find this actually in the original autopsy report, just that there were abrasions on the backside of her left wrist noted in a picture on that original report. It was later that a theory was developed that these marks could have indicated that she was tied up, because there was a rope found near the front door with her blood on it.
Oh my goodness.
Mm-hmm.
This is awful. What a horrific way to die.
It sounds terrifying.
And those fingernails at the front door means she probably got them into like folds of their clothing or something, and they fell off as they were leaving.
Perhaps. Or she was clawing her way to escape.
Wow.
Yeah. There was a pink and green blanket found on a chair close to where Sherri's body had been found. It had bullet holes in it, surrounded by gunpowder residue. It was surmised that after the first shot, where the gun had been placed against her chest and fired point blank. She was then shot twice more using the blanket to muffle the sound. 2 of the bullets were recovered from her body and clothing, and 1 was a through and through. Any of the 3 shots were determined to have been fatal. Someone had meant business by shooting her 3 times. It was overkill.
In the heart.
Mm-hmm. And they knew to use the blanket as a makeshift silencer.
Does that really help?
Sounded like it did, because there were no reports of gunfire being heard.
Huh. Because you always see that in the movies where they'll grab a pillow or something, and I thought, does that actually work?
It sounded like it did.
Huh.
At first glance, it appeared that the altercation had happened when one of Sherri's attackers found her on the 2nd floor and was surprised to find someone home. A fight broke out quickly. The blood evidence was concentrated all in the entrance area and the living room. By the state of the living room, it was obvious that there had been a battle royal. The detectives at the time concluded that the fight had continued for almost an hour, with a total of 5 shots being fired, with 2 missing Sherri completely and passing through the glass patio doors.
Oh, and that's how the glass got on the driveway.
That's right.
There's no way this is random. This is totally a personal attack.
Well, keep that thought, because it's definitely going to be chalked up to being random at first.
No way.
Yes.
There is no way that someone would beat a person this viciously just because you got caught robbing them.
Well, that's what police think at first.
How?
I don't know.
I'm not a trained law enforcement, and there's no way I'm buying that. 0.
Well, it did sound like it was Sherri's personality because she was so big and she was so athletic. They thought perhaps she fought for her life, and she definitely had fought for her life. Near her lifeless body, there were fragments of a very heavy ceramic vase. A tall stereo speaker had been knocked over and was lying very close to her head. Shelves from the shelving unit close by were askew, and an amplifier and a receiver on top of the TV were precariously perched. They were almost about to fall off, just hanging on by their cords. A drawer had been pulled out of an end table and had been dumped all over. At the base of the stairs, from the living room to the 2nd floor, a VCR and a CD player had been stacked neatly, as if assembled for carrying out, but then it was left behind. On the floor just inside the front door, there were 2 intertwined cords from the ransacked stereo equipment and some rope that had Sherri's blood on it.
Staged.
You're so on the ball.
Sorry. I just know that if you're going in to rob a house and you get startled, my belief would be that your objective would be to get them off of you and get out as soon as possible. You're not going to horse around for an hour trying to beat this woman to death.
That's right. It doesn't make any sense.
No, biting her? No.
There was a single bloody smudge on top of the CD player indicating that it had been touched after the attack. And there were smears of blood on the east wall near the couple's burglar alarm panic button and another hand smear on the wall. Police also find that the glass patio doors from the upper floor have been shattered. A slight bow in the glass indicates that the shots came from inside the house. So it's not like they shot into the glass doors to gain entry to the house.
Right.
This, like you guessed, was the glass that John had seen when he pulled in that night. Police sought out witnesses, and a few came forward. One neighbor said that they had noticed the garage door up and the car gone around 9:40 that morning. Another neighbor said that she had been handed a woman's purse, which turned out to be Sherri's, around noon by 2 gardeners that had found it just on the lawns of the community. Another person, a maid who was cleaning a nearby unit, said that she had heard what seemed to be fighting going on and something falling around 12:30, but she said she didn't hear any gunshots or see anybody leaving the house. As we all know, witnesses' memories are always a little hard to muddle through. But police were pretty sure that the attack had happened sometime before 9:30 when Sherri's car had disappeared. On March 7th, almost 2 weeks after the murder, Sherri's BMW was found 2.5 miles, almost directly east from the townhouse in a residential area with the keys in the ignition. No usable fingerprints were found in the car, but blood that matched Sherri's was found, indicating that the killer had driven the car after the attack. There was one unknown hair sample that was found and never identified, as far as I know, but it was in the car. Finding this car did little to further the investigation. Homicide detective Lyle Mayer, right from the very beginning, latched onto the idea of Sherri being killed in a burglary gone wrong after he ruled out John, who was his very first suspect. In fact, within hours of being at the scene, it was a theory that he shared with the very distraught John. He briefly asked about trouble in the couple's relationship or anyone that would have wanted to hurt Sherri from their past. But John had said that there was no one that he could think of. So the detective ran with this idea of a burglary gone wrong. The detective said that it was because the killers had fled in haste after the shooting, that the stereo equipment and the jewelry in the house were all left behind. In fact, nothing from the crime scene was reported missing except Sherri's purse, her BMW, and the couple's marriage license.
They stole the marriage license.
Yes.
Oh, this is a side piece. That's my guess.
You're so on the ball today, Christy.
Melissa, this is giving very similar vibes to my case next week.
Oh, really?
It's so ironic how we pick cases that seem to go well with one another.
So crazy, right?
It is.
But this does not remotely sound like a burglary gone wrong, does it?
No.
No. I don't even know how they would think that at the very beginning. The violence directed towards Sherri in the prolonged fight definitely says this is a personal attack.
Yes, and the blood on the stereo equipment after the fact means they weren't in the middle of robbing. They grabbed that afterwards and purposely left it there.
Right. You have the missing marriage license. Again, very personal.
And who knows that the marriage license is missing? Would that be something you would even go check? How did they find that out?
No, John reported it to the police later. He's like, hey, this is something I can't find in the house.
Oh, maybe it was while he was dealing with the paperwork that comes after someone's passed away?
Yeah, maybe. I don't know. But either way, he was the one that reported it missing to the police. He was the one that noticed it. It's not like the police noticed it missing that day.
Okay. Because we've been married for a long time to our spouses. Have you ever gone and checked on your marriage license?
No.
No.
But they had only been married for 3 months. So it was maybe still hanging around. I don't know.
Okay. This is definitely calculated and targeted.
Right. And the other aspect is the difficulty of getting into the condo in the first place. It's a gated community and they're in the center of this community. It would have been difficult. They had an alarm system, all of these things.
Right.
So it was all very interesting that right off the bat, they're like, nope, this is a burglary gone wrong.
Within just a couple of hours.
Mm-hmm.
That is tunnel vision. Shame on that police force.
Right. Well, I think that there are a couple of reasons why this might have happened, and we'll get into them. But several weeks after the crime, the detective's theory, to him at least, was confirmed when another burglary happened in a similar area where 2 men carrying a gun, similar to the one that was used in Sherri's murder, broke into a home through the garage and assaulted another woman.
But did they fight for an hour?
No.
No, they fought just to get her off of them and to flee.
Right. But this to him confirmed, like, look, they've done it again. There's this serial crime going on. The suspects were 2 Latino males, and sketches of them were made and shown to Sherri's family, but no further advancements in the case were ever made.
Did this detective look into John's past, or he just took him at his word that there was nobody that he knew of that would want to hurt his wife?
So he looked into John and he confirmed his alibi, and John was really distraught, and he believed John's emotion that he was really torn up over Sherri's death.
Right, but you can be that as well as have an idea as who might have done this, especially if you've been unfaithful.
Right.
And you're wanting to save face.
Mm-hmm. No, this detective doesn't dig too deep, even into theories that he's given. The lead detective was like, that's that. We've got 2 Latino guys. Case closed. We know that they're out there.
Ugh.
He wasn't interested in looking any more into the evidence or hearing any other theories. And there were definitely other theories, or at least unanswered questions at the time. A junior detective at the time pointed out the theory of 2 men didn't really jive with a bite mark on Sherri's arm. Men don't typically bite during struggles.
No.
A cast of the bite mark and a swab was taken of the wound and stored for later comparison.
And this might be a silly question, but is there an obvious difference between a bite mark made by a man or a woman?
I don't think so, other than like
Okay.
the size. I don't think that you could really determine. It's
Okay.
not like one of us has more teeth than the other.
No, I just meant more by the size.
Yeah. But some women can have really big mouths.
True. True.
No, I don't think that there's any size comparison between genders, between bite
Okay.
marks. So they couldn't determine from the actual bite mark that it was male or female.
Okay. But they should have been able to compare that bite mark to these 2 men that they arrested.
They didn't arrest them. They never found them. They just had witness
Oh.
description of them.
Okay.
Yes. But there was also the evidence of this prolonged battle inside the living room that didn't seem to fit with the theory of 2 men against 1 woman. While Sherri was tall and athletic, she wouldn't have been a match for 2 men, especially ones with guns.
True.
So that doesn't jive at all.
No.
Sherri's dad, Nels, was the most vocal about his theory of what had happened to his daughter. It was a theory he shared only 1 day after his daughter's murder. He wanted the police to start looking for a woman that had harassed his daughter, a former girlfriend of John's, and one that was a police officer. Yes. Before her death, Sherri had confided in her dad and her friend Jane that she was having problems with one of John's past girlfriends. Sherri had told her dad on several occasions that one of John's lady friends had stopped by their apartment after he had moved in with her. Sherri had told Nels that this woman's seemingly innocent act of dropping off water skis for John to wax had rubbed her the wrong way, and she had confronted John about his relationship with this woman. John told her that there was nothing between him and the woman anymore. They had once been dorm pals and a very long time ago had been lovers, but their relationship had never gotten that serious. It had always been a casual fling. Sherri had been upset when John ignored her request not to wax the skis. John had told her it was just easier to keep the peace and wax the skis for his friend. When the woman dropped by again to pick up the skis, Sherri made it clear to this woman that she did not want to see her around again. So it sounded like she was staking her claim.
Mm-hmm.
But that didn't stop the ex from coming around again. Sherri again had confided in her dad that this woman had shown up at the apartment again, this time when it was just Sherri home. And this time she was in an LAPD uniform, complete with gun and holster, clearly trying to intimidate her.
Oh, yeah.
This woman made it seem like she was surprised to see Sherri at home and learned that John wasn't at home waiting for her.
She wanted her to think that they were having an affair?
That's what it seemed like. This really got under Sherri's skin because she was usually the first one gone in the morning, and this woman was insinuating that this was a regular thing that she showed up. This was just weeks before the wedding, and Sherri was upset about it enough to call her dad about how an old college friend of John's had just shown up.
And so with her being a police officer, is that how she's getting into the gated community?
That is a good speculation. Sherri said that John had assured her that there was nothing between them and that he felt like it was best just to ignore this whole situation and it would eventually go away. And she believed her fiancé. Her trust in John continued even when the same woman showed up at her office in a skimpy outfit, walked right past her secretary, and created this huge scene about John not really loving Sherri and still being in a sexual relationship with her. This woman had declared in front of witnesses if she couldn't have John, no one would, and that when Sherri and John's marriage failed, she would be waiting. When Sherri told John about this scene at her work, it seemed that they worked things out. He said nothing would ever happen, and he suggested that the best way to deal with it was to ignore this woman and all of her crazy allegations. To Sherri, it was clear that this woman was unhinged and obsessed with John. She started to see her everywhere, in the grocery store, at the gym, and just hanging out on the street.
Stalking her.
It seemed that way. The whole situation made her totally uncomfortable. But it seems like she didn't share these other incidences with John, but she shared them with her dad. Perhaps she was just trying to follow John's advice and ignoring the situation and thinking that it would go away.
Yeah, because that always happens.
Well, she trusted John, and that's why the marriage went forward as planned. For Nels, though, this whole story had left a bad taste in his mouth towards his son-in-law. And it was only made more bitter by the fact that it had taken John until 1 a.m. on the 25th to notify Sherri's parents of her death. And even then, it wasn't him that called. He had his dad call and do it for him because he was so emotional. Something that Sherri's dad, Nels, characterized as weak.
Okay.
So there's not a lot of love lost between Nels and John, it seemed like.
No.
When Nels met with the police investigating Sherri's death the next day, he demanded to know if they were looking into John's ex-girlfriend, the one that was the cop.
The one who publicly said, if I can't have John, no one can.
That's right.
In front of witnesses.
Mm-hmm. In all of her complaining and sharing with her parents, though, Sherri had never given them a name, so they didn't have any specific person to tell the police to look for.
Yeah, but police just have to ask John, what police officer did you date?
Right.
Did they?
They did.
Okay.
Nell's theory and interference to the case, though, wasn't taken too kindly by the detective, who thought that he had already done a good job wrapping up the case.
Goodness.
He actually told Nels, "You watch too much TV."
What?
Mm-hmm.
Sir, you don't watch enough.
Yeah.
This actually blows my mind that an officer would be given this information the day after the murder, that John has this crazy, supposedly ex-stalker, and the police are like, nah, can't be. That's too crazy.
No, it makes more sense for two randoms to just come in and botch a burglary.
No.
Yeah.
That's frustrating.
Mm-hmm. In defense of the detective's stance, when he did question John about the possibility of a disgruntled ex, John had denied knowing anything about the stories that Nels was sharing. So he's like, I don't know anything. I know that there was this incident at her work, but all this other stuff I know nothing about. I don't think that happened.
What?
Yeah. And not an excuse, but at the time, the LAPD was swamped with murder cases created through gangfare that was out of control at the time, and they were understaffed. In 1986, there were 830 murders.
Wow.
So it sounded like they were just happy to get the case off their desk, not really caring if it was actually solved or not.
Then why even take it?
Right?
Just say, sorry, we can't get to this right now. Maybe next year.
It does sound so crazy. The detective found John to be genuinely emotional, and he couldn't find any motive to link John to the murder. And he had a solid alibi from his work.
Or he didn't want to look into a fellow police officer.
Well, that is one of the definitely running theories. John would say later that Sherri had only ever shared the incident at the hospital with him. And to him, it had never seemed like she was overly fearful. He said she was always more concerned that something was going on affair-wise. And he had assured her, like, nothing's going on like that. So the theory about the two armed burglars stuck despite there being obvious leads in other directions. John, after the murders, quit his job and moved away from Los Angeles. It was just too painful for him to live in the area. He would eventually remarry and start a family. Sherri's parents continued to hound the police for new leads and would put up reward money to catch their daughter's killer. They worked with TV shows to raise awareness, and when they learned about DNA evidence, they offered to pay for DNA testing to be done on any of the available evidence from the case. But their requests and offers didn't get them anywhere. And some believe that's because, like you mentioned, of who they were investigating. All that Nels knew about the woman that his daughter was having trouble with was that she was John's ex-girlfriend and that she was a cop with the LAPD. A review of the evidence from the crime scene and the investigation into it raises some serious suspicion about the integrity of those investigating the crime in which a fellow officer was indicated. For the next 10 years, police either refused to consider that a cop had hurt Sherri or may have even tampered with evidence that pointed to a cop being involved.
That's disgusting. Okay, if you're a cop and you're doing that, you're just as responsible as the person that did murder her.
Upon review of the cold case, it was found that recordings and records of Nell's suspicions about the, quote, lady cop being involved all had somehow disappeared.
Oh, conveniently.
These conversations were remembered by both Nels and John, but no official record of them could be found. They were either never recorded in the first place or were taken out afterwards. On October 11th, 1993, shortly after Nels had offered to pay for DNA testing, an officer named Phil Morit signed out all the forensic samples on the case. Or at least that's what the paper trail says. The officer would actually deny signing out the evidence at all, and no one could figure out who had actually taken them out for real. All that was known was that a large portion of the forensic evidence for the case just disappeared.
Oh my goodness.
Yes, including the cast of the bite mark that could have been used to identify the killer.
Yeah, that's like a fingerprint.
For a total of 18 years, what was left of the case sat in storage with nobody looking at it.
Melissa, this is definitely shady with the police.
So shady.
Yeah, I hope they all get their just comeuppance.
Well, in 2011, the LA police chief at the time created a cold case homicide unit to systematically start looking at old cases. 3 years later, Sherri's case was pulled off the shelf and eventually landed into the hands of Jennifer Francis, who I believe her last name might have been Butterworth at some point. Among the perplexing oddities of this case was the missing swab taken from the bite mark. It hadn't been amongst the evidence that had previously been signed out for more in 1993. So it hadn't been lost like all the rest of the evidence. It had been misplaced sometime earlier than that. So it hadn't been logged into the case file. Following the normal path that evidence handling took, Jennifer tracked down the swab's potential location to be the coroner's freezer. Evidence is usually stored there initially before it's logged into a case file.
For 18 years it sat there?
Yeah. The 2 swabs that had been taken of the bite mark had been cataloged at the scene, but they had never actually been recorded into the case file evidence. On a long shot, the coroner's freezer was searched by hand, and there, frozen to the side of the freezer, in a manila envelope that had the name Rasmussen written on it, it was found by a custodian on December 22nd, 2004.
By a custodian?
Yeah, so they just said, go search all the freezers.
Wow.
Mm-hmm. The envelope had absorbed moisture while in the freezer, and the case number had worn away from it. Whoever had collected the evidence for Sherri's murder file had only been looking for the case number and had left behind a single envelope that was partially frozen to the side of the freezer. There were 2 swabs from the bite mark that had remained for 18 years with no one knowing that they were actually a part of Sherri's case.
That's unreal.
Mm-hmm.
And that means that they hadn't cleaned out their freezers in 18 years.
No, crazy, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
That seems like not a very good practice.
No. I wonder if actually the practice did change after that. Like every year we have to take the freezers apart.
Yeah. Shouldn't they be like disinfected and
defrosted? Yeah.
Yeah. 18 years?
Mm-hmm. But this piece of evidence being lost actually had protected it.
True.
The envelope was not in great shape, and this would open up a later avenue for an appeal later. There was a hole in the envelope that allowed the custodian to see the red lid of the test tube vial inside, but it was deemed at the time to be intact, so the swabs were sent for DNA testing. The results came back in January of 2005. When they were run through CODIS, there were no hits, so it really didn't lead detectives anywhere new.
Except to check it with the female officer.
Well, the only thing that they learned was that the saliva was from a woman.
Oh, big surprise.
Yeah. Jennifer Francis brought this piece of information up to her superiors and suggested that with the DNA being female, it meant that the original theory of 2 male burglars was false, and it meant the whole investigation should be redone. Other detectives did not agree with her. They theorized that maybe one of the burglars could have been female. Plus, they argued that there were no female suspects in the case files. So when they were relooking at it, there were no female suspects.
Ugh.
So she started combing the case files for a female suspect to kind of give her theory some credit. She came across a, quote, third-party female who had allegedly harassed Sherri at her job and residence before the murder. She took the lead to her superiors, who told her that the female was a former girlfriend of the victim's husband, a current LAPD detective, but, quote, she was not a part of this. They insisted that the case was simply a burglary, as the department had long concluded.
Oh, fire them all. The dirty dogs.
Yeah. With no support to investigate the case further, and resources being shifted to solve a current case, it sounded like they had a serial murderer going on. Sherri's case once again went back on the shelf until 2009, when it got shifted back to its original investigating police station. And another detective would notice the oddities in the case. Van Nuys homicide detective Jim Nuttall. Evidence of the burglary gone wrong just did not match what he was seeing in crime scene photos.
Oh, he was intelligent, you mean?
Mm-hmm. There was a jewelry box in plain sight that hadn't been touched. The blood smear on the CD player stacked by the stairs by Sherri's body meant that it had been stacked there after her death by someone wearing gloves. If a burglar had been interrupted and shot Sherri unexpectedly, why would they take the time to stack items to steal just to leave them behind?
Right, and leave the whole crime scene a mess.
Right. He believed the crime scene had been staged to look like a burglary, and it had been done well enough to fool the first detectives.
That's a dumb detective. I'm sorry. I love the police, and I am so grateful for them, but this is hogwash. It wasn't done good.
It kind of was.
No, it wasn't.
Okay, you're right. In hindsight, it totally wasn't. But at the time, if you're an overworked detective and trying to solve a case, maybe you rush through it and it kind of looks like it.
If that's the case and you have this good, solid lead and you want to rush through it, maybe you shouldn't be a detective anymore.
It's true. Time to retire.
It is.
For sure. But this detective Nuttall, he did say that it was the fact that the DNA had come back as a female that changed his perspective, and that's why he was looking so closely at all of the evidence again. He theorized that there was no forced entry because the front door had not been locked and the alarm had not been set because Sherri was still at home. Nuttall believed that Sherri met the intruder in the living room unexpectedly and a battle for life ensued. Later testimony would be given that there was actually no concrete way to predict the actual sequence of events that took place. But there was lots of theories going around about like where she met the intruder.
Right.
But Nuttall believed that Sherri, at one point, had been able to put the dirtbag in a headlock, and that's how she had been bitten on the inside of her left forearm.
Well, that makes sense.
Mm-hmm. And at one point during the struggle, Sherri was hit with the heavy ceramic vase. Now subdued, she was shot in the chest once, and then again twice using the blanket. A personal kill.
Yep.
To Nuttall and the other officer working on the case, a female suspect just made more sense than two males. It explained the prolonged attack, and it made sense with the bite mark. The new investigative team looked into the murder and narrowed down 5 female suspects' names that showed up in the file. They literally took any female name that showed up in the file.
Right.
So they ruled out 3 almost immediately. They were Sherri's mom, Sherri's sister Teresa, and her friend Jane, who had lived with her before John. The 4th was a nurse named Deborah that Sherri had had an altercation with at work, and she had passed over her for a promotion. It looked like actually a pretty promising lead, but after DNA was collected covertly and found not to match the bite mark, she was ruled out. So then that led to number 5, the least likely of the suspects on the list, one that had only been mentioned once. In the case file on November 19th, 1987, so almost a full 2 years after, Detective Mayer had written, quote, John Rutten called, verified Stephanie Lazarus, P.O. was former girlfriend. P.O. meaning police officer.
Yeah, but I'm PO'd.
Yeah.
And they didn't put her other sister on the list.
No, her sister Teresa had visited them the day before, and so that's why her name had come up in the file as being there. There was some discrepancies of who the investigators approached first about this new potential suspect, if it was Nels or John, but they reached out to both of them. When they reached out to Nels, he was more than a little annoyed that he was once again having to explain his theory of the, quote, lady cop.
Yeah, because now it's over 20 years.
Yeah. And the way that they were treated was really deplorable. They said that when they had called for updates about their daughter's murder, they were ignored, hung up on, and sometimes they felt like when they had come in to meet with the detectives that they were intimidated and bullied into not asking more questions.
Trying to protect their own.
Mm-hmm.
And even for these cold case detectives to be looking back at the information, most of the evidence is gone missing.
Yeah.
So they're already at a disadvantage.
Completely at a disadvantage. It wasn't until they actually met with Nels that they were like, oh, yes, there is something more to this name. Because originally it was just, yeah, this is his ex-girlfriend. There was no suspicion linked to her at all.
And in the meantime, she's had over 20 years now to be a police officer, live her lousy life, and literally getting away with murder.
Yeah. The team reached out to John, too, to re-interview him. And something actually very interesting came up. He told them that Stephanie Lazarus, his old girlfriend, is who Nels had thought it was all along. John said that he didn't believe it, though. He believed that he had been given reassurance of just that from the original Detective Mayer. Mayer had assured John Stephanie had been cleared when he had asked about her before starting a relationship with her in 1989.
Get out.
Yes.
Get out, Melissa.
Mm-hmm. John had run into Stephanie during a trip to LA and then had decided to vacation with her in Hawaii with another friend to do some scuba diving. He had called Detective Mayer and asked him if there was any chance of Stephanie being involved in his wife's death. That's when Mayer had assured him that she had been cleared.
No way.
How odd is this on every level?
It's not odd. She was stalking him. They didn't accidentally run in to each other at the airport. I don't believe that for a second. This is Fatal Attraction gone wrong. Even more wrong.
But what seems odd to me is that John did suspect Stephanie enough that he needed to call the detective for reassurance. And yet, in his original interview, he didn't mention her.
Yeah, the math's not mathing.
No.
Were they having an affair?
We'll get into it. Because their relationship is a little bit more than what John originally was telling Sherri about.
Oh, 100% I believe that. But then to get into a relationship with her when there's even the slightest chance that she viciously murdered your new bride.
Well, that's why he called the detective and asked for reassurance. He did move forward with a casual relationship with Stephanie as a result of that reassurance.
Whatever you need, Johnny boy, to sleep at night, I guess.
Right. He said they had sex a couple of times before they parted ways, and they both moved on to their current spouses. But now new detectives have a name for the, quote, lady cop. Stephanie Eileen Lazarus was born on, I believe, May 4th, 1960, in Los Angeles, California. When she was in elementary school, her family moved from Inglewood to Simi Valley. There, they enjoyed a comfortable life. They were not well off by any stretch of the imagination, but they lived in a safe neighborhood. While her brother describes the family as close, it is apparent from future interviews that Stephanie's relationship with her father was strained at best, if not completely non-existent, as an adult. Stephanie was an active girl and a smart one. She was well known for her artistic talents and her problem-solving skills. After graduation from high school, she attended California State University and earned a degree in fine arts, and then went on to study political science at UCLA in 1978. A friend from UCLA described her as, quote, very gregarious and a wonderful ambassador of the dorm. She said about Stephanie, quote, she created a community around herself and had a lightness about her. It actually sounded to me like she liked to be the center of attention. It was there at UCLA that Stephanie and John were introduced. They had a lot of things in common. They both lived in Dykstra Hall, a dorm with a jock reputation. They both were very athletic and competed on several sports teams. Basketball seemed to be the main one for both of them. Stephanie was an energetic girl with lots of friends and a bit of a prankster. So she would often play pranks on John, one time sneaking into the shower room in the dorm and stealing his clothes while he was showering, just so he had to walk back naked. Another time, she would also sneak into his room and take photos of him sleeping in his underwear. And I had to question, is this regular dorm antics?
I don't know. I never lived in a dorm.
I didn't either, but I was like, okay, is this the stuff that goes on?
I don't think so. Just in Dykstra Hall.
Yeah. Maybe it was, though.
It seems like the things you would see in a movie.
Right. It seems like innocent pranking.
Mm-hmm.
John and Stephanie would both say that their relationship was hard to define, that they were just friends. Neither one of them thought of the other as a boyfriend or a, quote, girlfriend, and they definitely weren't mutually exclusive.
So friends with benefits.
Well, they did continue to hang out past graduation, and that's when their previous necking and petting sessions turned into something more.
Necking and petting.
That's how it was described.
Ew.
Yeah.
Petting is such a gross word.
That's how they described it.
Okay.
John attended Stephanie's graduation, and they took a few overnight trips together, including a group trip that visited his parents in San Diego. Over the next 4 years, from 1981 to 1984, they would casually hook up and have sex between 20 to 30 times.
That's pretty consistent.
Yeah, that's quite the benefits between friends.
Yeah, especially when you're not being exclusive.
No.
That's often.
At the time, they seemed to have a mutual agreement in their so-called relationship. It was just casual, definitely not exclusive. They were both busy with their careers and didn't want anything different. After UCLA, John had accepted a job at the hard drive manufacturing company, Micropolis, and Stephanie had graduated and decided to enter the LAPD Police Academy and became a uniformed officer in 1983, working the beat as a patrol officer in the Hollywood district. It was in 1984, while throwing a surprise birthday party for John, that Stephanie received the surprise. John was telling people that he was dating a girl, Sherri, and they were serious. They were exclusive. The couple had met earlier that year at a summer party. Like I said, it was love at first sight for the couple, and they got engaged really quickly on the 27th of May, 1985, less than a year after they met. Within a few months of that engagement, John had moved into Sherri's condo. It was a whirlwind romance for them. But for Stephanie, it seemed to be a whirlwind of a different kind of emotion. It seems she had always been just fine with the fact that they dated other people until John wasn't interested in including her in the mix. Stephanie was a person that liked to keep journals. Mostly they just chronologued her daily activities, with small snippets of her feelings about those she was spending her day with. In June of 1985, in her journal, she wrote, quote, I really don't feel like working. I found out John is getting married. I'm very depressed, very sad. My concentration was -10.
Okay.
As the wedding neared, Stephanie started to share some of her feelings about John with others. Late one night, she woke up a roommate, a fellow officer, to tell him that John had broken up with her. She was worked up and suggested that they work out to burn off some energy. She confessed to her roommate that she loved John. On August 6, 1985, her emotions spilled over into a blue handwritten letter she sent John's mother. In it, she wrote, quote, "I am truly in love with John, and this past year has really torn me up. I wish it didn't end the way it did, and I don't think I'll ever understand his decision."
And this letter wasn't put into evidence?
It wasn't put into evidence because nobody investigated her at the very beginning. This is all evidence that they actually find later when they are investigating her. I think actually this particular letter wasn't put in to evidence until after they had arrested her.
Wow.
Yeah. And they had to go back and find other evidence to support their theories.
Interesting.
Mm-hmm.
So John's mother didn't think this was a red flag when she found out that her new daughter-in-law had been murdered.
No, she didn't. It was actually John's sister that found it in amongst her mother's belongings.
Wow.
After she had passed away.
Huh.
That's an interesting thought, though, of why John's mother wouldn't think, hey, your wife was murdered and I have this letter that was delivered to me just a few months before.
And especially because this is all still brand new. It's not like she got this letter and they had been married for 20 years. And so she would have forgot about it.
No, it's just months before.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. It is interesting that she didn't come forward at the time, but she didn't. It wasn't found till much, much later.
She could have mentioned it to John, and it sounds like he would have said, oh, just don't worry about it.
Right? Or maybe it was mentioned to police and they chose not to follow it up because there was all those things that Nels had mentioned to police that weren't in the police file either.
That's true. Well, they had already decided it was two men.
Mm-hmm. Not long before the wedding, just before he had moved in with Sherri, Stephanie called John crying and pleading with him to come and visit her at her apartment. He agreed because the emotion from Stephanie was not something he was used to, so he was concerned about her. He got to the apartment and Stephanie laid it all out for him. She was in love with him, something that she had never told him before, but he said he made it very clear that he was moving on and marrying Sherri. She persisted and asked him for sex that night over and over again, saying she needed closure. John would later testify that they did have sex that night.
Oh.
It sounded like it was the same night as his engagement party.
No.
Yes.
Dirtbag.
He had sex with Stephanie and then went on home to celebrate his engagement with Sherri's family.
So the BMW was just a guilt gift.
It might have been.
Totally.
So now we don't want the BMW.
No. Ew.
Yeah.
That's disgusting.
And it does put a new taste in your mouth about why he was so emotional when she ended up dying.
He had to have had these suspicions.
Well, you know he did because he called the detective up before he started another relationship with her.
Right. But that was years later.
It was only a couple years later, like not even a full 2 years later.
Right. But when police asked, do you know anybody who would want to hurt your wife? No, I have no idea.
No. In his first initial interview, the one that is recorded, he does say, I don't have any idea who would want to hurt her. I don't have any ex-girlfriends that would want to hurt her.
And I don't believe for 1 second that she wasn't the first person to pop into his mind.
I don't know. Could he have been so distraught that it didn't come to his mind first off in his first interview, but then later on he did mention it to police? Because he does say that he did mention her to police later on. But the only recorded interview of him is not mentioning her. It's interesting, right?
Yeah.
John would later testify that why he did this was because, quote, she had no closure. I was way over my head and I didn't know how to calm her down, other than being a stupid and a young man. That's his excuse. Even though he repeatedly told her it meant nothing and said that he was still going to marry Sherri, it had given Stephanie the ammunition she needed to then blaze into Sherri's work, dressed to kill, shoving the indiscretion in her face. When she returned home after that altercation, she proudly reported to her roommate Sherri was, quote, wasn't that good looking.
Ugh.
Yeah. But the incident hadn't had the effect that she desired. The couple had still gone forward with their wedding.
Because John lied.
Yeah.
He's a liar.
And John had remained the one for her that got away. Other officers would go on to testify later that Stephanie was particular about who she dated. She had a particular type, and there was a joke around the office that it was, quote, the John standard.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
So everybody knows she's obsessed with him.
Well, they knew that she had this boyfriend that she was caught up on named John. She would eventually find a John of her own in 1992. Stephanie met LAPD officer Scott Young. They were married in 1996. This was after she and John had tried to rekindle their relationship after the trip in Hawaii, but couldn't. It sounds like they had had sex a couple of times after the trip in Hawaii, but
it didn't mesh because both of them in the back of their minds knew that she killed his wife.
I think that Stephanie just realized that John wasn't the same person afterwards. Because honestly, how could seeing the person you actually love murdered and knowing in the back of your mind that you might have had something to do with that not change you or not affect you?
And what's so frustrating about cases like this is Stephanie went on and married somebody else. She got to live this other life. John wasn't worth it. You become so hyper-focused on this man to the point of killing his young wife. And then after the fact, oh, well, didn't really work out. I'll just move on.
Yeah, and that's exactly what she did. Stephanie just moved on like nothing ever happened. The couple adopted an infant daughter and lived in Simi Valley, which had become like this popular suburb for local law enforcement officers. Stephanie continued her career with the LAPD, serving in some pretty high-profile areas and gained quite the reputation. She participated in the anti-drug DARE program, worked for internal affairs, and became an instructor for the police academy, specializing in research and computer skills. She also volunteered as the treasurer for the Los Angeles Women Police Officers and Associates, and advocated for daycare solutions for LAPD officers. It seemed that committing murder for this dirtbag didn't slow her down one bit. In fact, just 18 months after committing cold-blooded murder, she competed at the World Police and Fire Games in San Diego, where she won a gold medal for the 1600-meter relay and silver medals for the 400-meter relay and women's basketball. She even appeared on Family Feud on a special episode titled Battle of America's Finest.
No way.
Yeah, and they won.
Melissa.
Gross, right?
She did not deserve this kind of life.
No. She was promoted to detective in 1993, and then in 2006 landed a job with the art theft division working with high-profile people and cases that required her to have a TV presence. It was an area that she felt drawn to because of her artistic nature, and she once again took up painting, which she proudly boasted about in interviews, saying it helped her understand the field better.
She just liked to be the center of attention, like you said.
Yeah.
I don't know how you can do something like this and then be in law enforcement and just continue and not let it bother you.
Well, I think she compartmentalized. She just totally closed it off. It was in the art theft division where she was working in 2009 when Sherri's murder was getting reinvestigated. With only Stephanie left as a suspect, the investigation had to proceed very delicately. I'm not sure how I actually feel about this part of the investigation. They proceeded with caution because they said they didn't want to tip anyone off because Stephanie might be able to improve her defense if she knew they were investigating her. And they also said if it turned out she wasn't guilty, they didn't want to smear her reputation because her record was squeaky clean up until this point.
Because everyone covers for her.
Yeah, or she erases the evidence herself somehow. But I was like, you don't care anything about investigating other people that aren't detectives and smearing their reputation. How many times have people been investigated for crimes they didn't commit? And it does affect their reputation.
Or even imprisoned for a crime they didn't commit.
Yeah, where was the consideration there? But because she was an LAPD officer, they did move very carefully with this investigation. Was it being done to protect the reputation of the police? Because honestly, I'm very sure that you want to be very careful about bringing forward allegations towards a police officer.
Oh, 100%.
Yeah.
That seems more plausible.
Mm-hmm. But in all the documentaries and in all the interviews after the fact, it does make them sound like, oh, we were being this very covert nature, making sure that she couldn't further her defense and things like that. So I do hope that that was their intention. But with all of this going on, I have this nagging suspicion that actually you were saving face.
Yeah, I 100% think so.
Yeah.
They've been shady right from the start of this.
But some of the detectives, I don't want to think that they're shady because they seem like such good guys, especially the ones that investigated at the end.
Well, at the end, yes, but it's the beginning ones.
Mm-hmm.
But it is true because if you find out that this decorated now detective is actually a murderer, what does that even do to all of the people they've put behind bars?
Right.
You open up this whole flood of possibilities of appeals.
Right. You would have to be pretty careful.
Yeah, a dirty cop is not something that you can take lightly.
No, it undermines the whole justice system.
It does.
So detectives started to try and piece together what it would look like if Stephanie had murdered Sherri. They figured she would need time off work. They doubted that she would have been able to commit and cover up a murder while on active duty. What they learned was that Stephanie had requested 3 days off. 3 days to plan, 3 days to stalk, and 3 days to strike just before the murder.
Oh my goodness, I cannot even believe this was so overlooked. It's so clear.
The next thing they tried to track down was the murder weapon. She wouldn't have used her police issue weapon, but most cops at the time did carry their own off-duty gun. These guns were required to be ones that were compatible with Federal Plus P ammunition, the type of ammunition that was used against Sherri. Stephanie's personal gun at the time was traced using its serial number. It was a Smith & Wesson Model 49 .38 caliber, which was, rather ironically, stolen 13 days after the murder. Her reports to friends and her official reports about the gun being stolen didn't align. She told a friend that she had lost it out of her fanny pack, and in her report to the Santa Monica police, she had said that it had been stolen out of a gym bag when her car had been broken into. Interestingly, she didn't report it missing to the LAPD where she worked.
That's something you would even just tell your coworkers in passing.
Right. The police station where she reported the gun missing to, the Santa Monica station, was one that was located by a pier that was very popular for getting rid of evidence. The gun was never recovered, and it's assumed that she threw it off that pier. The gun that was supposedly stolen shot 5 bullets, and there were 5 suspected shots at the scene. The bullets shot by this particular type of gun would have had similar markings to the bullets that were found at the scene. 5 lands and grooves with a right twist. As soon as detectives started to really think that Stephanie was their main suspect, they sought guidance on how to proceed from a trusted superior. This guy's name was Bub.
Oh, I love that.
I know. Robert Bub.
Robert Bub?
Robert Bub.
Bob Bub?
Bub. Detective Bob Bub. And he actually did sound like a really decent guy.
He sounds like an icon.
Yeah. He decided that, yes, we're going to continue investigating her. Stephanie's name was never used in connection with the investigation. She was only number 5. Cover stories were developed to explain why files were being looked at. Now, looking over the crime scene photos again, it was clear that the burglary had been staged. But it was staged well enough by someone who knew what burglaries look like a patrol officer that responded to burglaries. In May of 2009, there was enough suspicion and circumstantial evidence to justify an internal affairs probe, which I thought was interesting because she had actually had connections to the internal affairs division. She had worked there before.
True.
Mm-hmm. The decision was made to work covertly to obtain a DNA sample. So obviously they didn't have enough evidence against her, concrete evidence anyway, to go to a judge and get a warrant for her DNA.
Well, and they want to keep it hush-hush.
Right. Following Stephanie around, they were able to collect a cup and a straw that she had discarded after eating outside of a Costco with her daughter on May 27th. 2 days later, the DNA came back as a match to the saliva that had been collected from Sherri's left arm 23 years earlier.
Wow.
Yeah. Questioning Stephanie was even trickier because she worked in the same building, and the department that these detectives were working out of was actually the same department that her husband worked at.
Oh, wow.
Mm-hmm.
And they managed to keep it from him.
Yes. They worked after hours and kept everything locked up.
That is impressive.
It is.
It's just sad that it took 23 years for someone to actually work the case.
Yeah, and bring it forward. And it didn't seem like following the evidence was that hard once they were actually looking at it.
Oh.
On the 5th of June, 2009, Stephanie, at 51, was invited to an interrogation room in the basement of the Parker building under the pretense of helping with an investigation that involved art theft. The location was chosen because all the officers would have to enter an area where guns were not permitted. It was all part of a very orchestrated plan. The plan had started much earlier that morning, around 4 a.m., when dozens of officers with little connection to Stephanie were briefed on a search warrant that they would be executing later that day. They had very little details about the specifics. They were just told to go to a location and wait there until they were given the go-ahead to open their sealed envelopes, which would contain additional details to the warrant.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah. The 2 locations One was close to Stephanie's home, and the other was close to the commuter station where she would drop her car off every morning and catch a train to work. So they weren't told what they were looking for. They were just like, go to these locations and we'll let you know when you open the envelope.
Because they didn't want anything to be leaked.
That's right. And they didn't know who to trust.
Right.
So Greg Stearns and Dan Hammarello were the detectives that questioned Stephanie that day, and their skills have been applauded by many. There was a very delicate line they tread on not actually accusing her so that she would keep talking, but making her nervous enough to see her reaction. It was really masterfully done.
Oh, this can be an art.
Oh, it was beautiful. The interview was captured by a secret camera hidden inside a briefcase, and it is the one that people have raved about. I cannot begin to describe to you how it felt to watch Stephanie's performance, all the while knowing that they had already nailed her butt with DNA evidence. It almost becomes comical to watch as she fakes surprise and tells police it was 1,000,000 years ago that she knew John. She uses long-winded explanations and the most hilarious facial expressions and hand gestures to try and sell her lies, but it's very obvious that she continually tries to evade actual questions that are being asked. Her avoidance and exaggerated details about the most random things are true signs of a pathological liar. At the end of the interview, Stephanie starts to catch on that they are suspicious of her. She ends the video by saying she knows how things work and what her legal rights are. Then she walks out of the office of her own free will, straight into the pair of awaiting handcuffs.
Oh, that's amazing.
Yeah, it is.
Melissa just showed me a little snippet of it, and performative is the word to describe that interview. And I think she really thought she was going to fool them.
Why wouldn't she? She had been telling stories for 23 years. Why wouldn't she think that this is still going to work?
Yeah.
There was a small part of me during the interview, because now I'm on to like conspiracy theories of your fellow officers. It almost felt like the officers were giving Stephanie one last chance to come clean and make a story about it being a crime of passion. But it all seems to be completely lost on her as she continues to claim not remembering much about her interactions with Sherri.
Not even remembering why her and John broke up.
Yeah, it is very comical. At first, she doesn't remember even Sherri's name. She's like, oh, I think his wife's name was like Shelly or Sherri or something. I don't even know if I even met her. And then they guide her through like, well, you know, we've had people say that you went to her office. And she's like, oh, yeah, I might have went to her office maybe once or twice. And then they lead on to be like, well, it sounded like it was an altercation. Like, did you have a fist fight or anything? She's like, oh, no, I think I would remember a fist fight.
Ah.
From going from that to, oh, I don't even know her name, or I don't even know if I met her, to, yeah, I was at her office, but it wasn't a fist fight. It just is all super sketchy. She obviously knows.
Oh, 100%. You don't forget that.
No, not at all. She's such a liar. When she was arrested, the go-ahead was given for the search warrants to be executed. In her house, they found her journals from the mid-1980s. There are numerous mentions of her love for John. One entry talks about how she watched him at a restaurant for 30 minutes. Another about how she would stop by his apartment hoping to catch him alone. Another entry is about her despair over the engagement and the depression that followed, prompting her to ask for time off work because she couldn't concentrate. Interestingly, there was no journal entry about her car being broken into or her gun being stolen.
Yeah. When she's pretty meticulous about writing down the events of her day.
Right, but she didn't write about her own car being broken into? No. On her computer, they found that she had continued to keep tabs on John even after she was married, searching him up and following his progress from afar. Police were also able to find evidence that Stephanie might have learned how to pick locks just before the murder took place, which would explain why there was no forced entry on the door leading into Sherri and John's home. Stephanie's arrest was met by surprise and outrage. Some couldn't believe that their fellow officer had committed murder. Others were pointing fingers, trying to figure out how it had been swept under the rug for so long. She was initially held at the Los Angeles County Jail, and after a lengthy wait period, bail was set to $10 million.
Good.
Yeah, well above what the defense had suggested, and more than twice what the prosecutors had proposed. And that was because of the strength of evidence against her, and she was deemed a flight risk. The trial began on February 6, 2012. It was interesting to me to see what facts came up in the trial and what facts actually weren't allowed. None of the stalking behavior that Nels had claimed his daughter had told him about made it in.
Because it was hearsay?
Yeah, and neither did the fact that only the marriage certificate was taken. The jury was not told about the missing evidence from the case files or the accusations floating around about Stephanie being allowed to view the case files in the early parts of the investigation. The jury did get the opportunity to hear about the DNA evidence, though. The saliva from the bite mark was a 1 in 1.7 sextillion match to Stephanie.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
No question.
No. And even with tampering, how do you get that good of a match? They did hear about the journal entries and about a picture of John in his underwear from college that she had kept for over 30 years.
Oh my goodness.
It was still in her possession.
That is wild.
Isn't it?
And it almost is like with her murdering Sherri and taking the marriage license, it was like she was trying to erase it from ever happening.
Yeah.
I'm just going to take any evidence. I'm going to get rid of the wife and take the marriage certificate or license.
Interesting, right?
Yeah.
Several people testified about her connections to John, and there was a lot of debate about whether she was obsessed over him or if she had so many other love interests that he was just one of many. And I did kind of feel bad for her current husband. It could not have been easy to hear, especially to learn about that she was still Googling John after they were married and actually paid for a search to look him up.
Yeah, I cannot even imagine. And let's hope that he's the stand-up guy because he's a fellow police officer. Thinking you're married to a stand-up person as well.
Yeah.
And then to find that out?
Well, they were able to adopt a child. Do you know what the background check is on adoption?
Yes, It's a lot. I think it's more paperwork than if you died.
Yeah. And they passed all of that. He totally had the wool pulled over his eyes.
Yeah, that would be a harsh awakening.
Mm-hmm. Surprisingly, for how much the media toted about her accomplishments and how well-liked she was, there weren't a lot of character witnesses in her defense. While some commented off the record that she was vivacious and supportive, there were just as many that had negative things to say about her temper. She was referred to as spazarous behind her back when she was angry.
Ooh.
The defense tried to raise the argument that Stephanie had never pursued John after Sherri's death. They said that Stephanie had reported the next day to work and her partner didn't notice anything different about her. She had no noticeable bruises from a fight, and she acted completely normal the very next day. They argued that had Stephanie actually killed someone the day before, she would have been upset in some way. Except she's a dirtbag.
Exactly.
Right?
And I'm thinking a police uniform, isn't that neck to wrist to ankle?
Yeah.
How would you know she had no wounds on her? It just means she didn't have anything on her face.
Right. And if you're not looking, are you really going to look that closely to see, oh, it's makeup covering bruises?
Right. Mm-hmm. Or a small cut on your hand.
Mm-hmm.
That can easily be explained away.
Right. You're not looking for it 20 years later or going to remember it 20 years later.
Mm-hmm.
All it did for me was prove that she was even more of a dirtbag because she could hide it and wasn't affected.
Yes.
She was really high on herself. There was one comment about how she had actually paid to have her own bulletproof vests made because the regular ones weren't form-fitting. And so they made you look really boxy. She really liked to be the center of attention. Like she liked attention that she received from guys.
Totally. And had John not found somebody that he wanted to be exclusive with, she probably never would have wanted to settle down with him. It was more that she now didn't have that option.
Right.
She was being replaced. She's a total narcissist.
Mm-hmm. On May 8th, the jury of 8 women and 4 men found Stephanie Lazarus guilty of first-degree murder. On May 11th, Judge Robert Perry handed down a 25 years to life sentence for the first-degree murder conviction and an additional 2 years for the gun enhancement charge. The family's interactions were interesting during the trial, and I'll admit I was really curious to read about how John was received from Sherri's family. I had wondered, would they be close or would they be standoffish? During the trial, when John did attend, it appeared that Sherri's family was friendly with their former son-in-law. But Nels made it pretty clear that he still felt John hadn't lived up to his end of the marriage bargain in protecting his daughter.
No, not at all.
Yeah, he said, quote, "I never thought John had anything to do with it, but he knows more than he said or admitted to. That bothered me. It bothers me today. John could have helped more than he did, but he wouldn't talk. If John would have backed me up just a little when I was saying that we needed to talk to Stephanie, I think the story would have been different."
100%.
Yeah. Nels and Loretta attended the trial every day, spending their nights in a 37-foot motorhome that they left in an RV parking lot close to the courthouse. On weekends, that's when they would drive back home. but they were there absolutely every day. When John was asked why he wasn't more persistent in bringing up Stephanie to the police, he said, quote, "It never crossed my mind that Stephanie had anything to do with it."
Liar.
Yeah. When Mayer said that she was cleared, he accepted it, he said, on face value. Interestingly, when he was re-interviewed in 2009, he was still sticking by his character assessment of Stephanie, that he didn't believe that she could be a person that would murder somebody.
What?
Yeah, even when they were reinvestigating, he's like, no, I don't think she had anything to do with it. And whether he was going off of that original detective saying that no, she didn't have anything to do with it, or his gut feeling, or I don't know. But in 2009, he was still saying, no, I don't think she's had anything to do with it.
Because I think if he said she did, they were going to explore and he would be busted.
Right.
Everyone in this case is just trying to save face.
I think so. Because during his victim impact statement, he ate that character assessment by commenting on how one of the things that he struggles with the most was that Sherri would still be alive if she hadn't been a part of his life.
Yep.
Like it was his connection to Stephanie that resulted in her death.
Right. And it's not his fault. I don't think he had anything to do with it. But it is his fault for how he behaved afterwards.
Right. I think had he been more willing to open up about maybe if he was feeling guilt over that and his interactions with Stephanie and shared that information with police, I think she would have been found a lot sooner.
Yeah, he hindered the whole investigation.
Right. Stephanie has appealed her conviction, claiming that the age of the case and the evidence denied her due process, that the search warrant was improperly granted, and that her statements in the interview prior to her arrest were compelled, that she was made to tell them. And she also says that the evidence supporting the original burglary theory should have been admitted into trial. That's what they thought all along, so that's what they should still believe. Her appeals were all denied. Then, on November 16th, 2023, she had her first parole hearing where she confessed to killing Sherri.
She did?
She did confess. And she was also granted parole.
No.
Yes.
Okay, that's bullcrap. After getting to have 23 years of your life, she should never be released. You already got your parole, honey. You got to live your whole lousy, stinking little cowardly life for 23 years, and they let you go?
Well, it was so messed up that the governor of California actually stepped in and ordered a full board review of her parole. Stephanie's parole actually was rescinded on October 2nd, 2024.
Oh, thank the heavens that somebody had some common sense. And I wonder if that was her connections that got her that initial parole release.
Isn't that interesting? A little more something to just irk you. Since her arrest, Stephanie has collected almost $73,000 a year from her LAPD pension.
What?
Because she was allowed to retire early before her conviction was proven.
But it should be revoked.
Nope.
Because we've had cases like that where it gets revoked afterwards.
No. They said because she retired before her conviction was actually proven, she gets to keep her pension.
What is going on? Are you guys okay over there?
Crazy, right?
Like, California is honestly one of my favorite states, but what are you guys doing?
It's just insane. Stephanie is now 64. She is incarcerated in the California Institution for Women. Her tentative date for her next parole suitability hearing is in a couple of weeks, on February 12th. So just because it was denied doesn't mean that she doesn't have the chance at it again. And that is coming up really soon.
And Sherri's family has to go through that whole process every time.
Well, exactly. Before they died, both of Sherri's parents recorded their victim impact statements so that the evidence of their loss was kept on record and could be played at every parole hearing. They both fully understood the importance of preserving evidence as long as possible until it would be needed.
Mm-hmm.
Because when they recorded these statements, they didn't know that she would be granted parole so early, but they knew there would be a day that it would come. Before he passed away, Nels spoke about the delay in justice for Sherri. And he commented that had her case been solved at the time she died, it was quite possible that Stephanie could have convinced a jury that she didn't do it. But because they were forced to wait, the advancements in DNA evidence made her conviction a sure thing.
True.
And I thought, that does sound like karma. There were lawsuits filed by the Rasmussens against Stephanie and the LAPD.
Good.
And Jennifer Francis, the criminalist who found key DNA evidence from the bite mark, also filed a lawsuit against the city of Los Angeles. She claimed that she had been pressured by police to favor certain suspects in this and other high-profile cases and was retaliated against when she brought this to the department's attention. All the lawsuits, to my knowledge, have been denied.
Wow.
Yeah. The current stance of the LAPD is that the reinvestigation by the department did not find any evidence of internal cover-up. The missing evidence whereabouts of the case is still a mystery.
That they're not going to investigate.
Well, they said they did investigate it and they didn't find any evidence of an internal cover-up. It was just mistakes made in the case.
Yeah, because evidence just magically disappears all of the time.
Apparently it does.
Yep.
And that is the case of the ambitious, conniving, and jealous dirtbag, Stephanie Eileen Lazarus, the jilted ex-lover that almost got away with murder.
Wow. That was an incredible case. And I can't believe that she's up for parole again soon.
So soon. There were other crazy details that I came across in this case that documentaries or newspapers didn't even catch on. There's hidden aspects of the case all over.
And there always is. There's so much more to a case than what we just see in the news.
Exactly. And that's why we'll be back again next week to dig deep on another case.
And we hope you'll join us for that one.
Until then,
see ya.
Bye. Maybe I agree.
I concur.
Do you concur?
I concur.
I concur. But it's so easy sometimes. I didn't say you were easy though.
Well, depends on the situation, I suppose.
A man is the quickest way to get you riled.
In every sense of the word. Yeah, absolutely.
Or the ring, or let's be honest, my preference would be both.
Both. Or a holiday. I would actually take a holiday over
a holiday?
Beamer. Yeah.
Yeah?
Oh, yeah.
Now I'm thinking, well, if the sky's the limit, I want a house.
Ooh, good point. Or we just want love, Melissa. We're talking about red flags in this guy. How about just love?
No, the material things, Christy, they last longer.
Touché.
Jennifer Francis brought this piece of information up to her superiors.
Suspicious
they're all suspicious.
They are.
Yeah.
Suspirior. I like
the
that.
Superiors.
It's a suspirior
and
theory.
They're conspiriors. It's a new word. I'm going with it.
I like it.
They're all suspiriors.
T-shirt.
Like Sherri's older sister, it was really sad. Connie had actually been convicted of fraud just days before Stephanie was arrested.
Really?
Yeah, so much heartache for her parents. She swindled something like $365,000 out of a veterans hospital.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah. And you don't get that from any of the documentaries where she's talking about her sister so lovingly and...
Right.
You just have to watch like little snippets of it because her reactions...
Is this it?
Yeah. You'll see her. Oh, jeez. Oh. That's what she acts like the whole time. Like she's learning to use new facial expressions.
Yeah. Like so concerned. Like, oh, what information can I give you? I know nothing.
When she just randomly spouts off like all of these other details.
3 or 4, which I think is almost like a stalling.
Yes.
Like she already knew how many, but I need a couple more seconds to gather my thoughts.
What was the last thing you said that I have to respond to?
Another Sound Off Media Company podcast.